Kidversations, small voices, big stories.
Hey besties, welcome back to Kidversations. Today we are talking with someone who helps keep Tennessee's history alive, Mr. Cody Boring, the director of Rocky Mount State Historic Site. We'll learn what life was like in the 1700s, how kids lived back then, why Rocky Mount is such an important place in Tennessee's story. Hi, Mr. Boring. We're so happy to have you here on the podcast today.
Remi, thanks for having me with you.
You're so welcome. Do you mind if I ask some questions?
I'd love for you to.
What made you interested in history, and what made you want to become a director at Rocky Mount Historic Site?
So when I was growing up, I used to really like to hear stories from my grandparents about things that they used to do, and their stories about their grandparents and everything. And then I just realized one day that history is just about stories about people. So that's really where my connection to history come from, and really my love for it is just knowing more about people and knowing more about our ancestors and everything about them. So at Rocky Mount, it's really neat because it's all the way back to over 200 something years ago in 1790, and people back then, they had bears out in their yard. They had to go weeks without seeing a doctor, and it was a big deal for them back then. There was a real struggle, and I think it's just a really neat thing that we get to do at Rocky Mount is connect people back to history.
You used to be a professor at King University. What did you teach?
So when I was at King, I used to teach business and marketing classes, and really what that's all about is helping people try to tell the story of their business or something in general. So at Rocky Mount, that's what we do is I help tell the story of Rocky Mount and why people should come out and visit with us. So it's a really kind of neat thing to do.
For people who haven't been there, what is Rocky Mount?
So Rocky Mount is the capital of the Southwest Territory from 1790 to 1792. So it's kind of a really neat place because it's connected back to George Washington. So I think that's pretty neat in general because how many places are connected to George Washington, and right at Rocky Mount was one of George Washington's friends, and that was Governor William Blount. And Governor William Blount lived there from 1790 to 1792, and he helped form the state of Tennessee. And it's really a important part of Tennessee's history, and I think everybody should really come out and visit with us.
Is it true that Rocky Mount was the first capital of the state of Tennessee?
So yes, it's totally true. From 1790 to 1792, Rocky Mount was the capital of the Southwest Territory. But let me ask you this, Remi. Do you know when Tennessee actually became a state?
Yes, I do. It was 1796.
So that's very true. So Rocky Mount predates when Tennessee actually became a state, but the really neat thing about Rocky Mount is it helped form the foundation for Tennessee to become the state of Tennessee. A lot of the early government, a lot of creating courts and everything, a lot of that foundation happened right at Rocky Mount under Governor Blount's leadership.
Who lived at Rocky Mount, and what was life like long ago?
So the people who lived at Rocky Mount was called the Cobb family, and that was in the 1770s. So there were some of the early settlers that came over here on this side of Tennessee. And life was really hard for these people. So you got to imagine there was no grocery store, there was no stores in general. They had to there was actually no place they could actually go to the doctor. So it was a really tough time for these people, and you had to be really self-sufficient. Now, that being said, people your age, you would have had a really essential role in your family. You would have been getting up early in the morning, helping your mother or your father do something that was going to be really important to the family.
You mentioned kids. What would their day be like?
So you would wake up at the crack of dawn, because you got to remember there was no electricity back then. So you would wake up when the sun came up, and you would get to chores right away. So you had to do everything during the daytime because there was no electricity and there was no lights. So you only had a few candles, and if you didn't get things done in the daytime, they just weren't going to get done. So you had chores to do just like everybody else did in the family. And that could be going and fetching water, that could be collecting eggs from the chicken house, but it was going to be things that you needed to get done for the family.
What's one thing that you think would be really hard for us today that the Frontiers did?
I think that would go back to having no electricity. And when the lights went out, the lights went out. And you got to think, so there's not going to be no iPads, there's not going to be no smartphones, there's just not going to be anything that's going to be using electricity. And so that when the lights go out, you have to go inside because there's going to be a lot of dangerous things outside that you just want to be protected from.
Wow. Since we didn't have any electricity, how did the hospitals work?
So there was no hospitals. There might be a doctor, but you would have to call the doctor and he would be maybe several weeks away on horseback. So if somebody got hurt, they may not be able to get to the doctor for multiple weeks. And it was just why people didn't live that very long back in that time period.
How old were they when they started doing chores?
So kids as young as 4 years old were actually helping already, and they would be out in the kitchen, and they would be helping their mother in the kitchen as early as that, even helping wash dishes. So they would have smaller wash tubs that would go on the floor, and they would actually let 4-year-olds help wash dishes and different tasks. Now, they things were very different back then. So children, both boys and girls, got married at a very younger age, and younger boys, they would go off and get apprenticeships and different jobs as young as 13, 14 years old.
So, what kind of jobs did they have back in the day?
So back then, you would have young boys that maybe they would leave their house around 13 to 14 years old and they would go be an apprentice. Maybe they'd go be a blacksmith. Maybe they'd go be a carpenter. But they would do something where they would leave their parents for at least a year or two when they would actually become a tradesman and get really talented at that before they could actually come back to their family. They were doing this so they would actually have a real job and a real trade so they could really help their family. Life was just a lot harder back then, and people grew up a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. What kind of clothes did they wear?
So everything back then in the 1700s, they would have had to, most times, if you were living here on the frontier at Rocky Mount, you would have made it all yourself. So at Rocky Mount, we have sheep and all that wool and everything, those fleeces, they would take those and they would spin them into cloth, and then that would be made into different things and different pieces of clothing. You would not have a lot of different clothing back in the day. You might have just a couple shirts, a couple pairs of pants, and you may only just get one shirt for Christmas, and that might just be it because it took so long to make one pair of pants or one shirt back in the day because you had to make it all by hand, and it was a very long process because you had to shear your sheep and get all that wool and eventually process it and turn it into the shirts that we're wearing today. But they wouldn't have been as fancy as we're wearing today either.
What kind of animals were there out there?
Everything they would have had back in the day would have been something that would have been purposeful. So what I mean by that is they would have had definitely horses because they would use that to work the land, that had chickens because they would have needed their eggs. They would also ate their chickens as well eventually. But it's one of those things where everything they had back then was to live on because they had to be self-sufficient. So these people, they crossed over the mountains and they came over here and they had nothing, but they wanted to make it, and they had to. If they couldn't make it on their land and they couldn't barter or trade for it with their neighbors, then they just didn't have it.
What kind of plants did they grow back then?
So they would have grew lots of different plants and herbs, and they would use these for different medicines. So they would have different herbs that they would have grown for medicine as well as just spices to add to their food. But that's something we do at Rocky Mount is we have a herb and spice garden that we represent something from the frontier, and we want people to come out there and essentially see how we grow these different things and how they would have done it back in the 1700s.
Are there any stories that people would find surprising at the Rocky Mountain Historic Site?
So there is this one interesting thing I think about Rocky Mount. It was in 1788. Andrew Jackson actually stayed at Rocky Mount while he was waiting on his law license in Jonesboro. So I think there's a lot of famous Tennesseans that is connected to Rocky Mount, and he's one of the top ones that kind of comes to the list.
Wow, I wish I could have been there in that time.
Yeah, that would have been neat.
How do you and your team bring history to life to visitors?
So what we do at Rocky Mount is we actually do this thing called living history. And what that is called almost like reenacting. So what we do is we dress up like it was 1790. So we have these things called uh, interpreters. And what they do is they have all these different clothes that you would wear back in the time period. So all our clothing and everything at Rocky Mountain is all made in-house by us. It takes us a long time to make each person's clothing, but what we want to do is we want people to actually know what it's like to be in that time period. And we find that if we dress out and do the reenacting and talk like they did back in that time period, it's a way for us to keep history alive for multiple generations and for people to really be connected back to that time period.
What can people do now at Rocky Mount?
So there's a lot of different things that people can do at Rocky Mount. So one of the main things you can do is we're a 50-acre historic site. So one thing you can do is you can come and do a tour, and you can actually be taken out and visit all the different buildings, visit with our reenactors, and actually be connected back to the time period. Now, at Rocky Mount, we also have a big museum. We have thousands of different old items that are connected back to that time period. And we also have a lot of farm animals. So we have lots of different sheep. I think we have 10 right now. And we have bunnies. And we have just things that we think children would like, as well as your age, to just come out and to be connected to the old time period. So we have a lot of farm animals, and it's just a place where you can come, visit, and we just want you to feel like it was in 1790.
What kind of stuff do you have in that museum?
So what we have in the museum is things that are old artifacts that are over 200 something years old. And we have them that we've been collecting for really since the 1960s. And people don't really know how many things we have at Rocky Mount but that's just how it is at all museums. What you see in the galleries is really just probably about 10% of what we have. We have a lot down in our vaults, and we've been collecting stuff from Governor Blunt. We have stuff from him and stuff back from the early frontier days. And what we do is we bring that out and we rotate it up into the museum so everybody can see everything we have. But there's so much to see that it's really hard to know everything we do have at Rocky Mount.
What is your favorite event or activity you host there?
My favorite event at Rocky Mount is during our Christmas season. And what it is our Candlelight Christmas tours, which is kind of a unique tour at Rocky Mount because it's a nighttime tour. So what we do is we actually decorate the entire place with Christmas decorations they would have done in the 1700s. There's no Christmas tree though. But that being said though, you really need to come out and visit with us because it's all lit by candlelight. And when you go out, you're going to be guided with a candle guide, so somebody will actually take you out there. But it's really neat because we're telling stories of Christmas in all the different rooms and connecting people back to the 1700s. It's a really neat time because when you come back inside Rocky Mount afterwards, we have this Christmas village when we have hot chocolate, cookies, Santa Claus is in there. It's really just a nice time for families to come out and visit and not only get connected to the 1700s, but come inside and see the modern part of everything because we have vendors and everything in there, and it's just a really good time.
Why don't you have a tree?
So there's no Christmas tree because that was something that was brought over by the Germans, and during that time period, we just didn't have that many German ancestors over here, and that was just not a tradition that we had yet.
If you could go back to the 1700s, what would you want to see or experience?
I think what I'd want to experience is getting to see our forefathers. I think it would be really neat to visit with George Washington, get to see them when they signed the Declaration of Independence, and I think that would be the really neat stuff. But that all being said, Remy, our country is so young, and we have so much more to do. And you think about it, next year we're about to experience our 250th birthday of America. And we're such a young nation, and we have so much more we can do and prove. And I think that's really what is so neat about America in general.
If a kid wanted to become a director or a museum director, what advice would you give them?
So, if you wanted to be work at a museum or be a museum director, I think the number one thing you're going to have to do is have a curiosity about history. And I think you want to know about the stories of the past because you have to want to know about the stories of the past so you can actually tell the story to everyone else. And that's one of the biggest things is being curious and just wanting to know why things were, why and how things have changed. Now, the next thing is probably going and visiting with your local museums and just talking to people that work there because they really want to help kids your age get into these roles. And if you're really interested, there's always somebody in these museums that want to help connect you to what they do.
Can you describe Rocky Mount in 3 words?
Yeah, so that would be really easy. So that would be where Tennessee began. And that kind of sums up the story of Rocky Mountain because what we say sometimes is Tennessee starts here, but I really like where Tennessee began because so much of Tennessee's foundation took place right at Rocky Mount.
Do you have anything else that you want to share with the audience?
So my one thing, if you've never been to Rocky Mount, this is the absolute best time to come for everybody, not just Tennesseans, but everybody, because we're going into our holiday Christmas season, and there's no better time to experience Rocky Mount. And I'd really just want everybody, including you, Remy, to just come out and visit with us.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Boring, and sharing everything about the Tennessee Rocky Mount Historic Site Museum today.
Remy, thank you so much for having me here on Kidversations. I've really had a good time telling you about the early story of Tennessee, and I hope you have me back sometime.
And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us. If you haven't visited Rocky Mount, make sure to check it out. It's like stepping back in time. We'll see you next time on Kidversations. Bye!
Kidversations, small voices, big stories.